You're all set.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the SUNY Online Summit. My name is Kim Scalzo, and I'm thrilled to be here this morning to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Jeff Borden is going to kick us off for day 2, and he is the Chief Academic Officer at D2L, which, unless you've been living under a rock, you know is our partner for the implementation of our new digital learning environment. Jeff is a professor within the communications and education disciplines and has taught at universities and colleges every term of every year for at least one institution for many years. But while he has coached and presented to faculty, provosts, and presidents in 41 countries and in 49 out of 50 states about how to transform the higher education experience, he will tell you that he is most proud to be a dad and a husband. His mantra for 14 years has been that he wants to transform teaching and learning as much as possible before 2025, when his only daughter starts her higher ed journey. What a great perspective to have. So as we get started on day 2, please join me in welcoming Jeff, and I will turn it over to you to get started.
Thanks so much, Kim. I really appreciate that. I really am quite excited about her journey, although we're mired in the high school years right now. So we're trying to get through all of that. I'm so excited to be here with you. SUNY, thank you so much for having me on. Special shout out to those of you at Stony Brook, who I know a lot of folks up there. I've worked with you over the years, but it's so good to be with you this morning. I would like to share with you what we believe that the future of learning really will look like, especially in a digital capacity. And so to that end, I want to start with a question. I do have the chat up, so I am watching, and feel free to keep having your back channel conversations too. That's fine. It won't distract me. But in the chat, if you want to put something in the chat, I'd love to hear from all of you. I have a simple question for you. Who taught you to take notes? Who actually taught you how to do a good job taking notes? Can you write that in the chat for me? Yep. Nada, no one. A 5th grade teacher, oh, that's nice. A colleague, okay, myself. No one, your dad, oh, that's lovely. All right, there you go. As you can see, very few people were ever taught how to take notes. And yet, we tell students all the time that it's one of the most important aspects of their learning experience, and we have just left them to their own devices to do that. Now, for those of you who were taught to take notes, there is every possibility you were taught incorrectly. You were given some bad information. If you've read the book, Make It Stick, you know about Brown and company's work and how they talk about note-taking and how little learning actually occurs when people take notes. The highlighting doesn't take notes, doesn't lead to learning. There's so many problems with it. If you really want to look at how we probably should take notes, you might want to ask the neuroscientist, Dr. Stephen Carroll, who has created this note-taking system based on how our brains work. He says that the very first thing you want to do is at the top of your page, after you've sort of created these different sections, is you want to create some metadata so you can find it later. Now, this is obviously where digital notes would be superior to analog notes, because you could search for this metadata. You could search for the information, the date, the topic, etc. But after that, on the left-hand side of your page, assuming that your brain is wired the way that most right-handed people's are, or half of left-handed people's are, then on the left-hand side, you want to create, just in as few words as possible, connections. You want to make in 1 word, 2 words, 3 words, just in a tiny little element, what is actually being said and why it makes sense. Good notes, very good, Jamie. It has this template. I've seen that. At the same time that you're doing that, here's where the real magic takes place. You want to encourage your students to draw, to sketch, to doodle, to somehow visually depict what's being stated or needs to be remembered on the left-hand side with those connections. So you're writing in as few words as possible, you're drawing at the same time. These are engaging multiple nodes of the brain as you start to go through it. And then when you're done with that, at the end of the experience, you can go ahead and write down your summary. Now, that experience in and of itself will see an 11 to 14% increase in retention of information in the ensuing days about those notes. But if you really want to get some bang for your buck and increase it to almost 25%, review that information that you wrote down in the summary just before you go to bed. Go through and take a look at it. It will likely jog your memory and make you go up and look at that picture, which will then make you look at that note. And it's really, really quite powerful to do that just before the encoding cycles begin throughout the entirety of your night. This is so serious to myself and my wife, who she's got her master's in education. She's a K-6 teacher, that we have used this with our daughter since she was a tiny little girl. And she would go through and jog her memory every night of all of the things that she had taken in those notes. One night she would do her history notes. One night she would do her English notes. One night she would do her math notes. And it is incredible how much she can actually remember today. The underpinning and the foundation is absolutely right there. So this is something that we encourage her to use. This is something that I use when I go to seminars, webinars. I look at different things. I use this note-taking technique. This is really, really important. Now, the reason I say all that is because I think Dan Pink encapsulated it really well when he said, you know what? There's a significant gap between what scientists know about how our brains work and what organizational behaviorists will tell you that our institutions do. So to the point we made earlier, most of us were not taught to take any notes. And for those of us who were, I'm going to guess most of us were not taught to take notes in a way that actually encouraged learning, but instead just did a lot of writing down of things for most people. That's a problem. And that's what I think the future of learning in a digital format can start to help us deal with and overcome. As you heard a little bit about me, this would be my visual depiction of my resume. This is my Wordle. These are all the things that kind of make up who I am. Yes, I'm the Chief Academic Officer with D2L. I'm an Executive Director of an Institute for Education. At the same time, I'm a professor. I have been a professor since 1996 or 97, teaching literally every semester, including summers, somewhere at universities, at community colleges, at various schools all around the country. But there's other stuff in here too. You might notice that, as it says, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, we have dogs, they're in here somewhere. I play the guitar, I play disc golf. I'm nationally ranked actually with disc golf. It's not until you take all this stuff and you put it into some semblance of a pattern that you start to get a sense of who this guy is that's talking to you this morning. Well, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about what I call the C's of education. And there are a lot of them. These C's that we're dealing with all the time, from critical thinking to curriculum, to change, to contextualization, to computer literacy, to communication. There are so many of these C's. I really believe that we need to try to formulate a pattern so that we can better navigate these C's together. I'm sorry, I know that's a horrible pun, but I'm going to stick with it because it kind of works here. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right, so in this regard, the way that I filter educational concepts is through something I call Education 3.0. It is the confluence of cognitive science and learning design and ed tech, where those things really converge, is something called connected neural learning that I really believe is the future of all learning. Is if we can do these things well, we can get there. I've written about these in books. I've got chapters in books. I've got books that I've actually been the anthology editor for. Happy to talk with you about any of these at any time. If you want to go to IGI, you can actually get some of these books. I don't make a dime off of these, so please use the 50% off code if you want. These are just academic publications. But these concepts are really important to talk about when we start talking about the future of the LMS. So today, in order to get us there, I really want to talk about the learning triangle. I want to talk about what we measure in terms of learning, and then I want to talk about what we treat in terms of learning. And that is what I really believe sets us up for the foundation of what is to come when it comes to learning and the digital learning environment. All right, I'd like to start by asking you now a really important question. But I'm going to ask you to do something for me with this question. I want you to define a word for me. Again, I'm watching the chat, so please put your answers in the chat. I never ask this of my students. I never ask this of audiences, but for this one time, I'm going to ask you, please do not Google what I'm about to ask you. All right, just use your own mind in trying to tell me what the answer is here. All right, I would like you to please write in the chat the definition for the word conation. Can you please write in the chat what conation means? All right, no idea, no clue. How do you spell it? It's good. I'm going to talk about how you spell it here in just a second. Good. Turning something into a cone. Yeah, I like that, Bancho. That's good. Two parties. All right. I don't think I've seen it yet. No, I don't know that anyone's going to get it. All right. Now, let me tell you, before I tell you the definition, and I am going to tell you the definition, I want to explain to you what just happened in your brains. All right. First of all, notice the people that are now trying to spell it out for all the rest of us. You are accessing a portion of your brain that researchers in neuroscience call the orthographic lexicon. This is where we hold meaning. This is the place in our mind where all meaning is held. It's not a physical location. It's sort of a research area that we sort of understand to exist. Now, as you try to access the orthographic lexicon, over the course of 30 to 45 seconds, when you've got a word that you're unfamiliar with, here's what you start to do. The first thing you do is you try to spell it in your brain. I noticed that most of you put a C first. It could have been a K, but most of you did a C, and that is correct. Then you start to, you spell it out in your brain. And as you do that, you start to say it in your head. Now you might, if you're at home alone, you might even be saying it out loud. You might be repeating conation, conation, conation. You might actually say it. After that happens, then you start to pull it apart. What are the prefixes, the suffixes? Is there a root word that you can attach to it? What is it that can help you understand what this means? Then you'll start saying, does it sound like something else? You'll try to use it in a sentence. You will go through this process for 30 to 45 seconds of trying to figure out what that word means. Now there's a problem. As you and I, experts who are talking to a room full of novices, as we talk, very often, we use words that our novices are unfamiliar with. We assign a reading and we assume since we sent that reading home one time that they read it once and then they therefore remembered everything that's in it. So we just use the words freely, or we use words that we use with our colleagues because this is our world. This is what we do. We're the math expert, we're the science expert, we're the history expert, whatever it might be. And so we use these words. And if I was in a lecture right now and I just used the word conation, and I said, it is super, super critical that we all understand the power and importance of conation. And then I just moved on. For 45 seconds, you're going to be trying to, first of all, understand what the word conation means. And second, when you get to the end and you realize you don't know what it means, you're also going to realize you've just lost another 200 to 400 words that I've spoken, depending on how quickly I speak. At that point, you're done. Most students at that point give up. They quit. They say, I don't want to do this anymore. Now, for some of you, you might say, well, okay, students could look it up on their phone. Yes, they could. They could absolutely look it up. They could look it on the laptop. But what happens then? They've lost more time of whatever it is you're talking about. As we talk about these things that we have done in higher education forever, we've got to really start to unpack the effective versus the not effective, the ineffective concepts that we have employed. The digital learning environment can help us overcome some of these things. Let me tell you what conation means now. I'll let you off the hook, okay? To do that, I want to talk about the learning triangle. The learning triangle, to me, really does represent holistic learning. It represents everything we need to know about student success. Student success sits on the learning stool, if you will, the three-legged stool of the learning triangle. Now, at the top of the learning triangle, which we have talked about for 110 years, we have cognition. Cognition is, unfortunately, where we've landed and stuck. Most of all education, K through 20, has focused on only measuring and only treating cognition. Now, even though if you go back to Dewey, you can find all sorts of people talking about how we've got to think about multiple domains, we've got to think about other things other than just the classroom brain, the classroom learner, but that's really where we spend most of our time. Now, luckily, we know more and more and more about how to teach people well. We know more about how people learn well. And so books like Make It Stick, again, which I referred to earlier, is a great demonstration of some things that we should do when it comes to actually helping people learn versus things that we've always done, which we know don't help people learn. But cognition is really where most of us spend almost all of our time. But there are two other very distinct and important domains. Affection is one of those domains. Affection is a domain that actually suggests that a person feels connected. It has to do with whether a person feels respected, supported, loved, nurtured, networked, if they feel like they have the resources that they need and therefore they feel satisfaction in that experience. We know that people who don't feel affection, we know that they literally walk into classrooms or they get online into digital classrooms with the wrong neurotransmitters being produced in their brains. If you go into a classroom not feeling connected, about a third of students, that puts them in a state of stress induction. It actually means that rather than producing oxytocin, which is what we need to take an expert's information to ourselves as a novice and learn from them, we instead are creating an overproduction of glutamate. Glutamate is a stress hormone, and that stress hormone actually comes out of the base of your spine here, and it begins eating neurons. And so for about a third of students who walk into classrooms feeling like they have no friends, they have no relationships, they have no companions, they are literally incapable of learning because their neurons are being eaten by the hormone glutamate. As you start to think about this, there's one more domain that we have to pay attention to, and that is conation. Conation, I think, unfortunately, in the last several decades has been replaced with some other words. Conation has been replaced with grit and mindset and tenacity, resilience. But really, the reason that I think it's a shame is because conation means all of those things. It's really the encapsulation of volition, of directed effort. It is absolutely true, and Carol Dweck really did an amazing job in the book Mindset of showing that if a person does not believe that they can, then they cannot. And again, for about a third of our population, that is so important to remember that they can't overcome it. They are stuck and they are going to drop out. They are going to leave. Conation is really, really important. So as we start to talk about the future of the learning management system, we've got to pay very close attention to the whole learner, not just the brain of the learner, not just the academic learner, but the learner who is supported by the other domains of their life that actually allow them to get into a place where they learn. What we're overcoming is over a century of indoctrination and of architecture. The architecture of learning, if you go back to look at the people who first put together learning for us, you go back to guys like Elwood Cubberley, who basically took Woodrow Wilson's directive and said, I want you to create a workforce. And that's exactly what he did. He created the very first classrooms and he created the very first school districts, which then later translated into what we saw in higher education. He said this very famously in the early 1900s, all focus must remain at the front for the teacher, the chalkboard, and the information, with students in rows quietly reading books and absorbing information, only speaking when spoken to, and only taking breaks when bells ring. Promoting isolation and fear will create the working class that America needs. That's how school was built. That's how classrooms were built, which leads to an important question. How many classrooms at your institutions still look like this? I've seen a lot. And I have traveled and traveled and traveled to colleges and universities globally. And I see this over and over and over again. The creators of that construct knew that putting people alone would make them feel isolated, would make them feel afraid. And yet we still, in higher education, say almost all work needs to be done independently, autonomously. Don't work with your neighbor. Don't look at what they're doing. You work by yourself, even though that promotes things that actually hurt learning. As a result, we're surprised that we have seen almost no measurability when it comes to learning. Creativity increases, critical thinking increases, job skills, transference. We have not seen, if you read these books, whether it's, again, K through 12, if you want to look at Gatto or Ravitch, or if it's higher ed, you want to look at Cracks in the Ivory Tower, or K through 20, The Case Against Education by Kaplan. This is really a problem for us, that students are coming out of the system having not learned much of anything. And that is not a digital issue. That is a learning and an education issue. This has nothing to do with online learning. This has to do with learning. When it comes to what happens in the sausage grinder, there's a lot of sausage being ground, but at the other end, it's not coming out in a whole form. That is a problem. See, we measure what helps us with cognition because it was easy for so long. We didn't have digital capabilities 100 years ago, so we measured what was easy. We measured scores. We measured grades, we measured GPAs. At some point, we threw some evaluations in the mix, although, as you and I both know, evaluations have very little to do with the future of just about anything. Most teachers that are not getting good evaluations are still teaching those classes over and over and over again. As any student will tell you, and as probably some of you in this audience have said, I've been part of classes where we all got together and said, we are really going to really give it to this professor who really we felt was unfair and undisciplined and unhelpful. And that professor was still teaching 3, 4, 5 semesters later. So we measure stuff because it's easy to measure, not necessarily because it's important. We could measure grit. We could measure how much tenacity a person has. We could measure their motivation. Is it intrinsic or extrinsic? We could measure what they search for after an assignment is given. Wouldn't that be amazing? After you say, I want you to go and do this thing, we could go and see what students actually look up. And then we could even take a look at their notes. We could take a look at the ecosystem built in their own notebooks if we wanted, because digital notes are everywhere. They're prolific. We could take a look at it. We don't measure any of these things, but we could. We could do something with it. As a result, when it comes to student success, the typical intervention is late. It's because these are lagging indicators. Because when students are in trouble, how do we know that? Because of scores. How do we know the scores are going down? Well, we have to wait for that assignment to be submitted. Then we have to wait for that assignment to be graded. And that takes time. The bigger the assignment, the longer the time that it takes. And so we may be 2, 3, 4 weeks after the fact that a student has really been academically determined to be in trouble, and we have no idea that they're in trouble until that point. So we go and we ask them, we say, hey, is everything okay? And they say, I'm dropping out because my grade has dropped so much, I can't bring it back up. When we start to look at how we measure what we measure, we often measure what's easy and not what's important. We need to measure what's important. So the future of the learning management system is not a system at all. It is an ecosystem. It is an environment. It is a DLE, a VLE, call it what you want. It is the connection of the whole learner and the domains that allow us to measure and treat the whole learner. Let's talk about what that looks like. We'll start with cognition, since that's where higher education usually stands its ground. Well, we need to realize words are not that important to most people, not just students, but most people. So the famous neuroscientist, John Medina, who wrote Brain Rules, a book I highly recommend, everyone should read it, the 12 things we know to be true about the brain. And he would argue there's really only 12 things we can replicate over and over and over again. He has done this experiment over and over again in schools, in churches, in businesses, in labs, in various contexts. He puts people in contexts that make them feel okay. And he says, all right, I want you to memorize some words. And he gives them words in 3 forms. He gives them words like you see here. He gives them narrative words. He gives them lists of words, but he also gives them audio words. He gives them the ability to listen to audio so they can try to memorize these words. And sometimes he gives them a set amount of time. Sometimes he gives them all the time that they want. And he says, I want you to memorize as many as you can. Then, after the session is done, they go away from wherever they are, the school, the lab, whatever. And he invites them back 3 days later. 3 days later, when they come back in, he tests them to see how many of those words they remember. Most people remember about 10% of those words 3 days later. He then brings them back 3 months later, 90 days later. At that point, he tests them again. And then they only remember 3% of those words. However, he takes that same group of people sometimes, or other groups of people at other times, puts them in the same context, and he asks them to review and memorize pictures. He asks them to look at visuals, at images, up to 2,500 images in one setting. And then he tests them. He brings them back 3 days later, and you know how many they remember? 90%. He brings them back three months later, 90 days later, and they still remember 2/3 of those images. They remember 67% of those images. As we start to pay attention to what is good for the brain, pictures are much more valued by our brains than words, by far. They speak to us, they contextualize, they help us understand, they make more sense. Visuals are important. That's right, Roberta, Adele was right. When I was at St. Leo, I was the chief innovation officer down there at this private university, and we had students that were all over the place, Pell eligible to the valedictorians of their schools, everything in between. We employed a system called Metal. Metal was built out of Monash University in Australia, and it was designed based on the notion that teachers and students could draw together, that they could ink together. Now, think about the process for a second. If a professor is going to go and give a discussion about some new concept, let's talk about science for a second. So a biology professor wants to teach their students about the heart. Well, what do? They very often go and they get a really rich, high fidelity, high image resolution video or picture about the heart. And when they do that, they go in then and they show it to their students, and they have that lecture and they talk all about it, and then they move through it. Unfortunately, we know, again, if you look at the books, Make It Stick, if you look at John Medina's work in neuroscience, students don't remember that information. In fact, what's fascinating is if you look at what's going on in their heads at that time, it's washing over their brains like an like a TV show, like they're just watching television. At the same time, if you look at that item on the right, way too many labels, the cognitive load is super high. We've got information there that we don't even need to learn yet, but it's in there anyway. It's really, really problematic. So this is not a good way for us to be teaching students. It's a way most instructors teach students, but it's not a good way for people to learn. Instead, what we really should be doing is we should be drawing a heart. Now, when I say that, I know what most of you are thinking. Most of you are and somebody may even put it in the chat, but I can't draw. I'm not an artist. I can't sketch. I can't doodle. Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how good that is for your learners. But before we do that, I want to say we can take it one more step. At St. Leo, we were excited and thrilled to be able to do this exact thing that I showed you. We talked to different professors around the university, and one of them was a biology teacher and was talking about teaching the heart. And so we spoke with her, and she said, all right, I'll try your idea. And our idea was this, not that she would go in and draw the heart, but that her students would go in and draw the heart. And so this is actually the environment that we had created. Where students were getting in. She put them into clusters of 4 or 5 students. You could do this online. You could do this face-to-face. You could do this wherever you are. And the students drew before they'd even had any sort of text or reading or information given to them about a heart. She just said, draw one. Draw a heart as best as you can from what you know. Now, that process, by the way, is called generative learning. Super powerful to ask students to do things they can't do yet. To ask them to do things that they're incapable of so that it motivates them, they understand that they need the information, et cetera. But at the same time, she instantly was able to see a couple of things. What information they came into the world knowing, and what information she was going to have to share with them because they had some things that were wrong, or they'd made some bad assumptions, or they'd done some things incorrectly. In fact, her favorite, this was her favorite slide, because she said, hey, as I look at this, I see that this group has made a massively problematic drawing of a heart. Why? Because it's symmetrical. A heart can't be symmetrical. One part of that heart is pumping all the time. It is a muscle. It is getting stronger and stronger. And the other part that's pulling in or having really the fluids fed to it is not nearly as strong, nearly as big. So she was able to talk with him in that moment and say, hey, why did you draw this symmetrically? And those students on day one had an aha moment where they went, oh, I didn't even think about that. Now, what was also really cool is she was able to see the students who were and who were not participating. Talk about active learning. These are not, this is not saying, hey, can you tell if your students are thinking? Nobody can tell if your students are thinking, but you can tell if they're participating, if they're active in the environment, or if they haven't drawn a thing, if they're just sitting there watching someone else do it. As we start to talk about the power of inking, the power of drawing, and by the way, notice that sanity bar over on the left, where she would put, hey, speed up or slow down. Do you get this? Are you understanding things? Students would write those words like conation. They would say, wait a minute, what does conation mean? And then she would stop and go, oh, sorry, I used a word you're unfamiliar with, and she would stop and talk about it. There's so much power in inking and drawing that we can really take advantage of it. Now, again, I know a lot of people say, but I can't draw. You don't have to draw. If you look at the palette for non-inking devices, there are often things like what non-drawers can do. Squiggly lines, 2 halves of a circle. You can draw, pieces of fruit. You can draw animals, things like that. We can draw things that are minimal, but here's what that does. It asks our brains to do more work. It asks our brains to understand more contextually deeper, better what those images were representation of, and then we remember more, we contextualize more, we connect it to more. So this is not just about retention of information. This is not just about memory. This is not just about recognition. This is about contextualization. This is about taking those things and touching the other parts of our world that actually help form that and paint that picture. That's what inking can do. So as we start to talk about the power of the digital learning environment, we really should be taking advantage of inking at every possible turn. And for students who can't ink, that we give them Post-it notes that can be attached to the sides of images so that they can write ideas and concepts until they get a device where they might be able to do some of that inking. If you start to look at what students want as they come out of the pandemic, it's interesting. They want some things to stay and stick around that they had during the pandemic, even though all of us are saying, oh, I wish we could get back to normal, wish we could get back to what we used to have. Well, students are going, I don't want to just get back to what we used to have. I liked some of the things. I liked the feedback coming through the channels. I liked being able to really interact with the professor over some of this stuff. I really want to do some other things. So as we start to look at the three-legged stool again, cognition is important for the VLE, for the digital learning environment, for the LMS, to really make sure that it handles in a way that is actually helping learning. The next thing that we want to make sure that it can do is take care of affection, that we can take care of people's connectedness. In 2018 and 2019, 7% of students left college because they were lonely. It had nothing to do with academic problems. It had nothing to do with financial issues. They felt alone. And these were not online students. Can you imagine what those numbers are going to look like today after the pandemic, as we're still sitting in it in some cases? Again, you look at what students want to keep from the COVID experience. They want to keep the ability to join clubs and groups online, to find those expanded hours of support. They want to continue their access. This is from the IHE survey that came out in 2020 that really talked about the importance and the power of some of the things that we had uncovered during the pandemic and how we really should continue to use those things. I don't know if you've seen it before, but there's a really famous picture that was created by a Columbia student. Columbia, one of the most expensive schools in our country, where he said, these are all the things I have to do to try to connect to my fellow peers and to my teachers at Columbia. The only thing that the school was helping with was the LMS and the video chat. Everything else this student had to create on their own. They had to try to find this avenue and that avenue and this channel and that channel, just trying to find ways to connect. Well, again, when I was the chief innovation officer at that university I was talking about before, we really tried to create an environment where people could connect. It was not just a portal that launched them off into all their stuff, but it was a place where we could literally put them into groupings. We could put them into groups based on their major. We could say all majors, you're automatically funneled into this group. It was a place where students could join groups. It was a place where students could create groups. They could create a study group. They could create an ultimate Frisbee group, whatever they wanted to. And it really started to lean into some of that notion that Richard Light found when he went all up and down the Eastern Seaboard, finding out that groups outside of class was the #1 predictor of success for any student of any type in an R1, in a state school, in a community college, in an Ivy League, didn't matter. Group affinity really was the biggest, most important element. As you look at student success, we've got to look at connectedness. We built all of this out into something we called Lion's Share. It was basically a social element, a community element that sat on top of our digital learning ecosystem that also had, again, portal capabilities. It had some other functional capabilities. It allowed us to connect people to the things that matter to them at the moment that it allowed them to do that. It was really, really quite powerful. And then that brings us to conation. Again, if you're going to get to a place where you want students to be successful, what do you measure and what do you treat? You need to measure conation. Now, some of you may think, well, wait, how do I do that? I don't know how to measure conation. And that's been a problem for all of education for centuries, right? Well, not anymore. See, when we start talking about digital experiences, we have access to bits of information that people are unfamiliar with in the past. We can put together things that we've never been able to put together before. We started working with a company called Discourse Analytics when I was down at St. Leo. They have really taken off since then. They're working with dozens and dozens of schools, big name schools. They're talking about saving huge percentages of the at-risk population in terms of retention. And why? Because they're going out and looking for cognitive markers. They're looking for a person's motivation. They're looking for a person's self-esteem. They're looking for their self-awareness. They're looking to see, are they open-minded? What is their social intelligence? And they're creating these lovely dashboards for the students themselves, but also for the counselors, the advisors, the other folks that are out there that are saying, hey, this student that's getting an A in that class is still in trouble. They're still going to leave. They're still having problems. Their financial problems, their problems with regard to their mindset, their problems with regard to their tenacity, their problems with regard to their loneliness, they're all these different things. One of my favorite stories when I was at St. Leo was a student who we were able to save just before she was going to drop out. She was an A student and she has done very, very well for 3 semesters, but she got to her 4th semester and she got into a class where she felt like there were 2 problems with the class. Number one, she felt like the professor in the class didn't like her. And number 2, she felt like that class was too difficult for her. She couldn't overcome it. She was a first in family university student. No one in her family had ever been there before. So she went home that weekend and she said to her mom and dad, I've got this class, the professor doesn't like me. I don't think I can pass it. I don't know what to do. And their response to her was, well, I'm sorry, but that's what happens in this family. We're not college material. You should drop out of school, come home, get a job, and then we can all move forward. We were able to find her because of this particular company's analytics that showed us that she was in some trouble. And so we reached out to her, luckily before she pulled pushed the button that said drop. And we were able to talk to her. And somebody was able to say to her, don't worry about having a professor who doesn't like you. First of all, that may not be true. But second, everybody has that happen. We're people. You go through life with people who like you, with people who don't like you, with people who don't care. That's okay. This is not specific to you. This has nothing to do with you. This is just a person thing. And second, when it comes to getting through the class, we've got the writing center, we've got the tutoring service, we've got all these other things in place. We've got peer tutors that can help you. This does not have to be a hurdle you can't overcome. And she was so delighted by that. She stayed in the class. She passed the class. In fact, she got a B in the class. And then she went on to get her degree. We were able to find her, even though she would not have been on any risk indicator for cognition. She was absolutely on a risk indicator for conation. The reason that this was able to work is really another aspect of this future of the learning ecosystem. Everything has to talk to everything. Everything has to be connected to everything else. You've got to have data that's coming in and out of systems. You know, how often a person does or doesn't go to the library, that matters. Now, how many emails a student sends to their professor in the first week of class, that matters. Did you know that if they send you 3 emails or more, they're probably in trouble? Now, a lot of professors see that and they think, what are you talking about? They're in trouble. They're communicating with me. How's that bad? Well, it's because they shouldn't be emailing you 3 times in the first week. So there's a problem. They don't know something. They don't understand something. They can't see something. These are markers that we can start to pay attention to help with students be successful or that we can ignore so they're not successful. Now, when we do that, well, then we can start to tackle some other really fun, bigger, significant issues. We can start to talk about the problem with groups. Now, this is a whole nother talk that I have. We're not going to go through it today, but you know, and I know students hate groups. Most professors hate groups. And it's because we treat groups so poorly in higher education. We don't treat them like they do everywhere else, where we let, you know, the students, we let them create their own group, or we let the LMS randomly assign a group. What a stupid way to create a group. Nobody would do that in business, but we do that in class. And then how they project manage themselves, well, they don't project manage themselves. And so there's all the infighting, and then there's no assessment and accountability. We could tackle that. We could start giving confidence-based assessments. Wouldn't that be powerful? Don't you want to know when there's a student who answered something and said in the following question, hey, I know that I got that right, when in fact they got it wrong? That's probably the most dangerous learning environment that you have. When a student thinks that they know something that they don't actually know, because now they have to unlearn something and then relearn something. Confidence-based assessment can be quite powerful when we really start to take a look at what it shows us. We can start to employ things like super memo or head magnet so that we can literally lean into the spacing effect, the Ebbinghaus curve, so that we can start to see that students are or are not remembering stuff. We can look at a student's rate of decay for how quickly they forget stuff, and we can remind them of that stuff just before they forget it, which allows them to remember it twice as long the next time. Oh, it's a great question, Nisha. How does this translate to faculty development? Well, we've got to have some conversations about neuroscience. We've got to have some conversations about learning design, what that means, what that looks like. We've also got to start talking about the practices that don't work. Again, if you haven't read it, I hope you all do Make It Stick by Brown. There are so many practices that we still employ that do not work, and yet we do them over and over and over again. It is such a great book. It's really powerful. At the same time, we can start to do some stuff that we think is fun and enjoyable. One of my favorite stories that one of our designers came up with when I was at St. Leo working with the ID team. She created this course. It was an art history course that she had created for a professor, and the students could go through this with this doula. They could go through this this sort of fake museum and start to take a look. By the way, Adele, the writer of Brain Rules' name is John Medina. So I just saw that. As they went through this, they could read, they could listen, they could watch, they could look at these famous pictures, stuff like that. But she did something kind of clever. Over in the right-hand corner next to the doula, she put this little statue. That statue was clickable. Now, the students didn't know it was clickable. No one told them it was clickable. It just was there, and some students happened to click on it. And when they clicked on it, they found that it opened up a dialog box that gave them some new and interesting information. It was an augmentation to what was going on in the class. It wasn't required. They didn't have to have it. It was just there. It was something that would help them understand the class better. Well, she put a discussion then in week 7 of this 16-week course. And she said, what did you think about the information shared by the statue? And that's all she said. And so the 4 or 5 students who found it went into this discussion and started putting some thoughts, and the professor came in and interacted with them. But more than that, the other students in the class started saying, wait a minute, what is this information? Where did you find this information? Where is this? What is going on? And so some of the students kind of got that it was an Easter egg, and that's when they said, well, there's some hidden items in the course. You got to click on some stuff to find it. And guess what? The students did. They clicked on this and that and the other. They clicked on more and more. They went back and they reviewed stuff to see if other stuff was clickable. They spent more time in this class, she said, than any class she'd ever had previous to that in terms of her art history class. We can start to do some interesting and fun things. And it might even lead to a time where we can give professors an audit that says, hey, here's the cognitive load of your class. Here's the cognitive load of your pages. The average course contains this many modules, you have this many modules, or it has this many content items, you have this many content items. The average page has this much text, you have this much text. Or you don't have as many videos as most people. You have more videos than most people, whatever. We might be able to get to a place where we really start to help the professor, the student, to deal with holistic learning. And when that happens, you may find what we were able to find at St. Leo, that you can intervene with students before it's too late. Before their grades go down, before their grades drop. You can actually say, we want you to be a part of this experience and succeed and do well. That's what the future of the learning management system looks like. I want to thank you so much for your time and your eyeballs and your ears. I'm happy to talk about this at any time. So please reach out to me, jeff.borden@d2l.com. I am happy to have conversations about this. As I said, I've written books and chapters. Happy to share anything I can with you at any time.
Jeff, thank you so much. I want to just say there are a couple of questions from the chat that I want to come back to, if that's okay. And if folks have others, they can feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll come back to them. So is that okay? I'm just going to go call them out to you, and you can respond.
Please.
Okay.
Sorry,
So this is from Heather Bennett, and she says, I love this emphasis on how powerful visuals and drawing are, but how do we make this work for disabled learners? Blind, low vision, colorblind come to mind first, but tech and visual oriented learning could be an issue for other learners too.
Great question. A couple of things. First of all, we know from some of the research that is out there that there's about 7% of classes have to take that into consideration at any given time. That students with visual impairments and those sorts of things, that affects about 7% of classes every semester, but it's a different 7% every semester. So for the 93%, we should be doing this all the time because that's not a consideration for those particular students. However, for those that do have those visual difficulties, visual impairments and disabilities, we have metadata. You can give them contextualization of words. There can be audio descriptions that are associated with pictures and images. And then, of course, there are times that you can't do this. You just say, you know what, I've got 2 fully blind students. It's just too hard, too problematic. Or you can try to find some way to accommodate, say, hey, I want you to describe to somebody else what's going on, type it on a Post-it note that's around the picture, things like that. So it takes a little bit of creativity, and it absolutely takes an eye. You're right to call it out. When you've got students who are in that situation, you need to look at it. But for 93% of classes, that's not the case. So we likely can kind of go on with some of these things anyway.
Great, thank you. A couple of folks asked, where did the data about what students want post-pandemic come from?
Inside Higher Ed did a survey. It's in, I'll get you the deck, and it's in the notes of that page. You can go take a look at that. It's a great survey.
Great, great. And then next question is from Katie Elliott, who is thinking about the part where instructors and students draw together. How might that work in an asynchronous environment?
Yeah, it absolutely can work in an asynchronous environment. So basically, you give them the prompt, whatever the prompt is. I want you to build something, create something, draw something, whatever. And then that board is up just like a discussion board is. And if you use, there are plugins that you can use inside the D2L system. There are standalone whiteboards and things you can also use if you prefer them. And the good ones will tell you who drew what. And so it basically gives you a record to be able to see the different people who were participating over time. And they can literally build stuff over time.
Great, thank you. And I think we're actually catching up quickly. Somebody asked if the recording will be available, and it will, of course, along with everything else, I believe. And then the next question is from Mark McBride. Do you see adaptive learning as being a useful tool that can be implemented into the course to connect learners to all points of the triangle?
I do. However, the amount of work behind that is tremendous. So really what we're looking about is we're looking at creating clustering and think like pairs and things like that. So in the past, the argument has always been, you can't do adaptive learning because you can't adapt for every single individual person all the time. And today that's probably still accurate, but we have much better sense of the clusters that you can put people in. For example, if you want to ask people, what ice cream flavor do you like? While we know that not everybody likes vanilla, a large chunk of people like vanilla. Not everybody likes chocolate, a large chunk of people like chocolate. So you can start to look at some of the bigger clusters of sort of propensities that people have, and you can adapt toward that. And then over time, you can fine tune that to make it more and more and more granular. But it really takes both time and attention, but it also takes, you got to have your eye on the long ball there. You can't just do it once and expect it to work. That's not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Okay, thanks. Question from Val Chuck Lohman, who is talking about the learning analytics piece. And wondering if they'll be well accepted by students. Do we ask them whether they want their every move to be seen by the big brother?
Sure. So let me tell you how my mentor responded to that when I asked him that question. He was a biology professor who went on to run a teaching and learning center at a school in Australia. He said, when you go into the doctor, you've got kind of 2 kinds of people. You got people who go into the doctor and they don't tell the doctor the whole story because they're embarrassed or because they don't think the doctor has a right to know. And then the doctor can't really diagnose them very effectively and help heal them. And then you've got people who go in and tell the doctor everything, and the doctor has all the inputs, all the variables, and then they can start to make the suggested corrections or additions. I fall into that second camp. I think that when a student comes onto campus and they're on that campus, that the things they do in that campus for success are things that are incumbent upon me as an administrator or an executive or a professor or whomever to help them be successful. And if a student is sometimes not going to be successful for reasons they don't even understand because of things going on with them that maybe they can't put those connections together, as someone 30 years their senior, I can. I've seen it. I can help them with that. And that's the whole reason that they are there. I don't want them to leave with a bunch of debt and not have the degree. I think that that's far worse than me being a little bit intrusive. Now, that said, there are some really nice data things that you can do to make sure you're not pinging the wrong people at the wrong time. It's not a shotgun approach. You don't want to take everybody with one behavior and send them an emergency email that says you might be dropping out. That's annoying to a lot of students who are not at risk at all. So you want to look at that, and there are ways mathematically you can start to get to the center of the people who are in trouble and actually help them. And we need to again fine tune and hone those metrics as we go.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to hijack the questions and ask a question to kind of bring it back for SUNY and kind of where we are right now with the implementation of our digital learning environment, for which, of course, BrightSpace is the foundation. And as we think about everything that you talked about, we're at a really opportune time where, you know, almost every faculty member across SUNY is going to be having to think about what they do in their course and how that gets translated and converted and brought into the digital learning environment. You talked about a lot of really great things. The chatter in the chat was fantastic. I can see people's, you know, minds are, you know, going 90 miles an hour. If there was one thing that you think, given where we are and what we're about to embark on, you know, cohort 1 just got launched, right? We're about to start delivering training to faculty. We're starting to think about course migrations. What could or should we prioritize? What should our campuses think about and prioritize to get the maximum potential you know, value out of this new environment, looking towards the things that you just talked about?
I would encourage, remember I talked about the C's of education? I can't think of a more important word in 2022 than the word connection. Find ways for students to connect. Now, when I say that, I am using connect in the broadest sense. They need to connect to the content, yes. They need to connect to the professor, yes. They need to connect to their peers, they do. They need to connect inside the classroom, but they need to connect outside the classroom. They need to be connected. And so the activities, the behaviors, the things that we put in their way, and that's essentially what we're doing here, is we're putting a bunch of stuff in their way and saying, hey, pick this up and examine it. Hey, take a look at this thing. When we put those things in their way, it should be about connection. Connection is measurable because connection is a linkage. It's the number of times a person does something. It's the amount of time that a person does something. We can measure a linkage. We use terms like engagement. What's engagement? What does that mean, really? How do you know if a person is engaged? Well, I don't. I can guess, but I know if they're connected because I can measure it. And
Yeah.
so as we start to measure these things, you're going to get a much better sense of how your students are doing. I really, really think that's the word that I would focus on in 2022.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
There's a question from Maureen about, you know, and Simone about what's available in the BrightSpace platform. So I'll just say that, you know, there is an analytics piece of what is included in our base license, Maureen, and we can talk more about that with you offline so you know exactly what is there. Many of the features of the core platform are available. It's just going to be a matter of when things get rolled out for us. So we'll take that offline as the kind of SUNY response. Yep. I did want to just bring one more question forward. Do you have any, and this is from Matt, do you have any opinion on the studies of Clark and Meyer e-learning and the science of instruction?
So I might actually have that book in my shelf here. I'm a little bit bigger of a fan of some of the learning design stuff that includes the neuroscience. I think that we got to be careful about making declarations of things that are so, when we can't replicate it over and over and over again. And that's one of the reasons I use some of the citations I use. Even if you look at Connectome and some of those sorts of things. Now, unfortunately, Connectome was not written with an educational audience in mind. It should have been. It was supposed to have been, but it was for neuroscientists. But as you start to look at what we can replicate over and over again, that's when we start to say this is true, this is valid or valuable. Other than when there's a disability involved or something like that, that's always the caveat. But their work, I think, is a little more. They take a little more license. I'll say it that way. I don't think it's bad. I think I would use it as maybe a starting place, not an ending place.
Got it. Thank you. And I'm just going to make one comment, and you can feel free to chime in on this as well. But in addition to thinking about, how we, think about and leverage this new platform for the benefit of our students, we are, of course, embarking on a huge professional development opportunity for our faculty and staff who will be interacting in the system. And, I think from my perspective, having, formerly been director of our Center for Professional Development, I think about all the ways in which we engage folks across the system for our own learning and our own professional development. And that, to me, that concept of connectedness also applies. And there's several things that we're doing across SUNY to support that. We have very big and very engaged communities of practice, but I just wanted to add that perspective into it because how do we take notes? How do we know when folks are getting it? What are the triggers that we should be looking for? I just think all that applies in that context as well.
I'll tell you, when I was at St. Leo, we used that same tool. In fact, I apologize. I put the wrong name in there. We used to call it campus.app. I think they've gone to Pathify. I think they're called Pathify now. But we used that for that exact purpose. It not only connected our students, it connected the professors, it connected the administrators, it connected the staff. There was a faculty senate group that only faculty senators could get into and see. But at the same time, there were groups that just talked about pedagogy and teaching and learning, that the faculty could come in and say, here's what I'm doing. There were research groups where they said, here's research that I'm doing. Does anybody want to join me? Go to this conference with me, things like that. So there really are some lovely connecting tools out there that really do help.
Awesome. Well, I know we're coming up on time. I think that we have gotten to all the questions that were in the chat. If we missed a question, I apologize. Many thanks to Chris for helping out with that. Any final words, Jeff, before we close?
I can't tell you how much I wish you all the best with this launch. I know that it's work. I really do. I've done it a few times, but it will be worth it. Put the time in now and good things will come.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for the inspirational talk and the great insights. We really, I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I know many of our folks did as well. So thank you all.
Well, good luck with the conference.
Thanks.